Boards, games. We might be talking about sealed bid auctions, but we're not gonna shout. What is an auction with a sealed bid? I guess it's when the numbers are hid. And
Yeah.
I guess that's fundamentally the way that a game can become faster to play. But that's just my opinion. What will Alan Paul say? We'll find out as we converse along the way. Hello, good morning, good
Oh,
afternoon, good whatever it
very
is, wherever you
good.
are. 10 a.m. is UK time. Time for Busy Beats and Board Game Letter episode, I believe 943.
I
Pondering
know.
mechanics, mechanisms, seal bid auctions, and yeah, my initial thoughts about sealed bid auctions are
Hmm.
that are the way to go when you don't want the auctions to take over everything. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah. If you want to have each individual auction quick, seal bid is probably the way to go. Yes.
Mm-mm.
Because everybody's effectively signing at the same time, and then you all have a big reveal, and it's nice and dramatic. That's what we like with auctions.
Yeah, like that drama.
Yeah.
It's quick,
Mm.
it's fast, it's easy to do, and there's questions about how you hide these things, how you resolve ties, but we'll get into all of that along the way. Let's
Correct.
firstly take a step back and talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights,
Yeah.
recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. Um, what have you been up to in the past couple of days, Alan?
Well, I have been well. One thing that's very important for you as well as me is I have actually now almost finished reading through the laid out rules for Last Bug Standing in the Circle of
Oh,
Doom. So that's good. So I have got a proper laid out set of rules. There are a few little odds and ends to sort out, but it's looking quite good. I like that. And the other thing that
yes, we
happened
saw each other
yesterday,
about 11 days ago at
yeah,
Aircon, and we were talking about some of the graphic design, which I'll be very interested to see the next iteration and see how it goes with
yes,
that.
yes, I haven't had that next iteration back yet from Akar, but I will very shortly. The other thing that I did yesterday, which I've been meaning to do for about a month actually, is to
Oh,
finish off the design of a new Airfix Battles D-Day scenario. The Airfix Battles D-Day compendium is something that has been on the stocks for ever since Airfix Battles came out, and it's been so long I can't even remember. Was it 2015? I can't even remember when Airfix Battles came out. And we've been Nick Fan and I have been working on it. I would have to say sporadically since then. And I've actually got what was an interesting. I had this interesting idea that we put aircraft in the D-Day compendium because aircraft are quite important for D-Day landings. And I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to do a scenario which is basically kind of bombing the beaches because it's relevant. But I thought, yeah, but Airfix Battles is really basically a ground combat game. Is this even going to remotely work? Because it won't
even
be a
though
bit
it's
boring.
called Airfix Battles, I mean, I would have thought
Mm.
that Air Fix Battles, it's about air,
That's
in the
nice.
title.
Yes, fair, yes. I could tell you about the derivation of the word airfix, but let's not go there. So I played it. I designed the outline of it some while ago, and then I actually finished off the design of that, and it was surprisingly good. I
Oh,
was amazed actually.
congratulations.
Yeah, so that was nice. So then there is now I've called it Sword in the Air because it's the Sword Beach landing, Sword Beach area. So I've called it Sword in the Air, and now I've also followed it up with the ground attack, which is called Sword on the Ground. So there you go. That's my
Well,
feeble attempt at humour.
that sounds fantastic. Congratulations. I've been doing a tiny bit of game design myself. Um, one which I'll talk about later, a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer.
It's a nice short
It
name. It's a nice short
has
name for you, that one. Yes.
constrained bidding, and previously it was 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 was the currency that you had in hand.
Okay.
So the 3s and 6s are missing. You
Yes.
never get any 3s or 6s.
Right.
There is some currency coming into the game. There's probably an equal amount going out of the game. And so it stays equal, and there was just moments of, oh, I quite fancy bidding that, but I can't. Now, I wanted to make it more constrained. I went for 1, 2s, 5s, and 10s. So I realized that, hey, let's go with what people actually expect from currency. And I'm slightly embarrassed that it took me so long to work this out.
Are you going to have completely constrained amount of currency in the game? Because that's nice. Because I think
Oh,
Philo
yes.
and the stack has that. Yeah.
So each auction, you might get another bit of currency coming in, but there's also currency coming out. So the
Yes.
only values of these currency cards is 1, 2, 5, and 10. And you start off with 1, 2, 2, 5, 10. And obviously the 1s and 2s are only worth 1 and 2, but at the same time, there's this sort of intangible value that they give you flexibility. And if you have cards, you have to bid at least one card. So if the only thing in your hand is a 10, then when you're bidding, doing the blind bid section, then that's obviously terrible. So you need to be quite careful about that.
That's interesting, because we can talk about this in the context of Fzzzt as well, because that has a very similar type. This is Fzzzt, and we've got our little mascot there, a chief mechanic. He's a chief mechanic there. Oh, you can't quite see that. There we go. Chief mechanic, his little furry friend. But we talk about that with Fzzzt, because Fzzzt also has constrained currency values. It's a very important part of the game.
Cards. Yes, it's very interesting. I actually just skimmed through a quick explanation, but I'm looking forward to your explanation. I'm sure it will be better. But yeah, other than that, I think that one minor achievement is just watering plants. But let's talk about brilliant thing. What's the little thing which is brilliant? I'm going to say, shall we say watering plants is brilliant, or shall we go on to sealed bid auctions? Maybe we can have two brilliant things. Watering plants is brilliant because it's nice having house plants. It's nice having these plants around. And if you're in a house where, especially if it's in your parents' place and your parents haven't been there for quite a long time, you might want to water the plants so that they die. So when they come back, it's like, oh, all these things are still alive, they're still green, and it feels welcoming, and it allows them to flourish, and it also allows them to keep maybe doing a bit of photosynthesis.
I agree. I mean, we've got a big yucca plant in our bathroom, which we inherited it from some friends when they moved and their new place didn't have anywhere for it. So we inherited this thing, and it's still there. I think that was about, that must have been 15 years ago at least. And we water it fairly religiously every day, and it sits there in the bathroom, presumably giving us more oxygen, taking out CO2 from the bathroom.
Now,
which is fine.
I want to remind everyone to obviously comment, ask questions, like, follow, all that stuff. But at this point, let's crack on. Let's talk about what this actually is. What are sealed bid auctions? Are they just when the numbers are hidden? Let's
do the quote from the book. Yes, the book says players secretly make a bid. All bids are revealed simultaneously, and the high bidder wins. However, there is also, and I think we need to include this in, sealed bid with cancellation. We probably should cover that. In this.
Carry on.
And this one is players secretly make a bid. All bids are revealed simultaneously, and the high bidder wins, unless there are ties for the high bidder. Tied bids cancel each other out and are treated as the lowest bids. So that's a bit of a wrinkle. And I have to say, in the discussion, the authors are fairly scathing about sealed bid with cancellation. So we can probably wrap that one up fairly quickly. But let's stick, I think, with the sealed bid auction itself. So
I mean, I don't think we need to agree with the authors necessarily. More interesting, but I will say that in terms of how Board Game Geek defines it, the first sentence is the same. It does go on to, as it frequently does, summarize some of the discussion, saying typically some tiebreaker mechanism is required. I mean, I would almost say always. Well, because I guess you can have every card being a unique number, which is a tie, which removes the need for a tie break, like in For Sale. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But anyway, common ones include closest to the start player or using a secondary currency
Yes.
for a tie-breaking bid.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say a variation of this is called sealed bid with cancellation. In this case, if two or more players have the same high bid, they are eliminated from contention. The highest non-duplicated bid is the winner. This is best used with constrained bidding to make ties more likely, and was first used in What the Heck,
Wow.
originally called Holster-Geller. So it is sometimes referred to as the Holster-Geller mechanism. And I do personally really enjoy highest unique number. I enjoy that. And hello, Joseph Kelly. It's lovely to see you. But I think that highest unique number does add a little twist to it. I've seen David Brain explore this quite a few times, and it's personally my favorite way to determine a start player in a game if you might want to be the start player. So I say, okay, everyone show a number of fingers, highest unique number starts.
Oh yeah, I think that's good because that's got speed and you don't have to bother with the tie break. But I think for that purpose, it's good. I think for an actual kind of in-game auction, highest bid with sealed bid with cancellation feels not unfair. May not be quite the right word, but
Well,
it
adds
feels
in a lot more chaos. It
does.
adds
It
in a
definitely
feeling
does.
of,
Yeah.
oh, if only I'd bid one more, I would have gotten it. But isn't that interesting? I mean, obviously, you don't want to do it with a super long game, given the amount of chaos.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you played the. I mean, isn't there a thing in Confucius where ties cancel each other out? I might be getting it wrong. I mean, there's definitely a thing in one of David Brain's games where it's just like the final points in the game. If you get the exact same number of points as someone else, you don't win. It's the highest unique number of points. And I think this is a really interesting thing.
In Confucius, I mean, in Confucius, there is an option, the Admiral option, where if at the end of the game 2 players tie for winning, instead the Admiral wins, regardless of where the Admiral is in terms of points. So it's not the next one down.
The Admiral could have been one of the tied players, or could be the lowest scoring player.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the with that version of Confucius, which I should have made it a normal. I should have put it. I didn't have the willpower to make it a normal way of playing, but I should have included it as the main way of playing. So that if you're not winning, and it doesn't look like you're going to win, if you can get the Admiral and engineer a tie, that's the kind of supreme way of winning Confucius. But anyway, but that's not to do with sealed bids, of course. That's
sure, but I mean, it's
that
a
works for that
form of cancellation. Yeah, this kind of highest unique number wins, whether it's for an auction or whether it's for winning the entire game. Isn't that a similar sort of chaos? Isn't that a similar sort of, well, you need to understand what's going to happen, what other people are going for, and you can influence people. Maybe you can influence what's in their hand. Maybe you can remove some currency.
I think it works. I think cancellation works best if you've got fine-grained currency and quite a lot. If you've got bids which are very, very constrained in terms of the range and how you do it, then I think that cancellation doesn't work as well because you're more likely to get those. So if there's a high bid of highest bid of 10 and you've got constrained bids and the range is likely to be 5 to 10, then it's very, very difficult for people to claim something with a 10 bid because you might find 2 people claiming you might have quite a lot of ties. I think.
Say the opposite. I would say that I would say that if you're going to have cancellation, that the cancellation should actually come into effect. I think that, talking of David Brain, I don't know if you are aware of their 5X game.
I have played a lot of David's games.
So this is a game which there's a gamer joke of, okay, there's 4 X's, exploit, exterminate, expand, and exterminate. And David said, well, I'm going to make this game, which is 5 X's, so it's one better. and there's excavate, and
Oh, right. Yes,
obviously,
yes.
so there's basically everyone's got to handle 5 cards, and you put down cards, and it's a. I mean, it's not really even a 4X game. I mean, there's no, but the cards have a vague allusion
Oh, right.
to
Yes. Yeah,
what
sure.
they're meant to do. Like expand might get stuff, and exploit does actually generate stuff, and exterminate does actually
Mm.
potentially take stuff from people who've played one specific card. But the entire ethos of that game is guessing what people are going to do and
Right.
playing
Yes.
around them. And
Yes.
so, if people are going to get water, then you want to exterminate them because the exterminate card might exterminate anyone who plays water cards. And similarly, when you actually go to build your monuments, it's the highest unique bid. I
Yes.
believe, so forgive me, David, if I'm getting this slightly wrong, um, that wins. And I think this is a nice thing. I mean, it's a game that I would say might take an hour the first time you play, but really it should take about half an hour. But
Yeah. If it's a relatively short game and you're exploring that psychological effect of trying to bluff it, it's almost like bluffing. I think that if they do say that, and I think the book actually mentions that. If that's the purpose of your auction, I think that's really good. That's really strong. Yes. Definitely, but it becomes a more central part of the game if you've got sealed bid with cancellation. If it's a standard sealed bid auction, it's a way of sharing out resources
for
so
sure,
that
I mean,
people can share them
I
more
realize that
easily and
sealed
quickly.
with cancellation should have
Mm.
almost been its own episode, but I don't want. But I feel like
Let's
it's
not. Yes.
whereas sealed bid, it's hey, let's do this and get it done quickly, and it's not even going to be a super focus. Okay, if I mean, cancellation is its own form of tiebreaker in a way
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
because
Yes. You're saying if you
if you're
tied, neither win.
saying go round from this person, or that's a really neat way to have a tiebreaker. If you're doing unique values like in For Sale, where every
Yeah.
single card is a different number, then that obviously means that there's never a tie, which is a really neat way to bake that
Yes.
into the design of the game. And cancellation as a tiebreaker, if we kind of agree with that definition, which I mean, it's a hot take. I don't 100% agree with anything that I call a hot take, but I think that it's giving it a very unique flavor, and it's
Yeah.
pushing you to think more about what's going on in other people's minds. And it reminds me more of things like Fox and Chicken or
Yeah. Mhm.
Out of Gears, where people are playing cards and you need to play around them. It's got that evasion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How about this is the most vicious type of auction you think of? Sealed bid with cancellation, everybody pays. Oh, that'd be great, wouldn't it? So you do the high bid, you tie with somebody else, and everybody pays. Yes, that could concentrate the mind a lot, couldn't it? I wonder if I might do that. I might do that as an experiment.
Wow, I hear your evil laughter. Let's crack on and get into some examples. Um, so there are I was going to say quite a few games with this. I mean,
Hmm.
relatively more than some of the other auctions, but still, there's only 94, which I don't know if this is because a lot of games with sealed bids don't bother to put it as a mechanism, because 94 seems awfully
Yeah.
low
Mm, mm.
considering how many there are. But one thing I want to note before we get into stuff is that, Game of Thrones, Rising Sun, Ankh, I mean, these
Yes.
are, I mean, Viceroy of the auctions are a big part of that game, but the three that I just mentioned are not auction games. And I think that it's by having sealed bids that, you can have an auction in it without turning it into an auction game.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because Fzzzt, which is the one I wanted to talk about
Yeah,
later,
let's get to that.
that
What
actually,
goes on here?
that actually, I didn't have sealed bid auction as part of its mechanic, although I've just submitted a correction to that. Now, okay, with this game, which is one of ours. This is a surprise to our game, designed by Tony Boydell. Well, I did quite a lot of development on it as well. In this game, you have a row of robots coming out. It's a conveyor belt of robots. Each robot looks something like this. I don't know if you can see that. You can't really see it on there. It looks a bit like this. So in the top of the card, you've got a number. You've got some power zap things. That's the value. That's the value of the card when you're using it in the auctions, and below it is the amount of points you get at the end of the game. And at the bottom of the card, this side, there is a kind of type of robot that is a symbol, an icon for a type of robot that is, and that's used when you allocate into production units. We'll go into that in just a sec. But so what you're doing in the game is you reveal the line of robots. You turn up a number of robot cards depending on what the card at the end of the row states, and then you auction each individual card in a succession of auctions through a variant of sealed bid. So in this case, you have to bid. If you've got cards in hand, you usually start with 6. Towards the middle of the game, you're starting with 6, the maximum hand size, but you have to bid at least one card, and you secretly bid. Technically, your opponents know how many cards you've chosen in turn order around the table. So there is some information. It's not completely sealed, partially sealed bid anyway. And then you'll simultaneously reveal, and the highest bid wins. Now,
I mean, this is an interesting point because it gets to how do you hide this stuff? Quite often, it's just holding a bunch of stuff in your hand.
Yeah.
But then you need to think about that physicality. Like, if it's tokens, then are these tokens small enough to have in a child's hand? Is it going to be inaccessible to some? Like, lots of adults have small hands, and if you're only testing with, people with big hands, then that's never going to come up. So there is a bit of an issue sometimes of how do you cover this up?
Yeah, this is a card game, so face down cards is really easy.
But then, as you just said,
we made a virtue
determine how many cards someone's put down, which you've decided to address this issue by saying you showed a number of cards going round clockwise if you care to do that, but in reality, most people just plonk them down.
That's right. We made a virtue of it by saying, you can know what people put, but I mean, particularly towards the middle end of the game, people just bid. They just simultaneously bid effectively because the values of the cards go from 0 to 5, and if you've got 20 cards in your deck, or no, you won't have that many. You might do 15 to 20 cards in the deck, then you literally don't know what your opponent's bidding at all. Now, the important thing about this sealed bid in Fzzzt is that everybody has got a mechanic card, which is this guy, and that is a 0. That is a 0 bid, but there's only one. Everybody only has one of those initially in their deck. I think there is another card in there where you can get another 0, but that means that there are the dangerous cards in Fzzzt, hence the name, is the actual Fzzzt, is the Fzzzt card itself, which is minor. You can't see it. It's probably a bit too. -2 points. Can't quite see it. It's worth 3 for bidding, but it's -2 points. And because it's a broken robot, you can't allocate it to a production unit. Now, production units, which look like this, production units allow you to allocate robots to them during the game and score more points than the face value. In this case, if you've got one with a screw and an oil, that will get you 6 points for those 2 robots.
Ooh, very nice.
At the end of the game. But the Fzzzt card doesn't. Fzzzt card gives you -2 and can't be allocated. So sometimes you'll want to actually bid 0. And as I said, you have to bid. So if you've got your mechanic card in your hand, you might, everybody tries to bid 0 to get out.
But if you've bid, but the number of cards are going to be bid in succession.
Yeah.
So if 3 were revealed and in the first 2 cards, you've already bid all of your cards and you've got nothing left in hand, you don't have to bid for the last one.
You
You
can't
don't draw
until
more cards are revealed all in one go.
That's right. So the interesting thing about Fzzzt, and what makes it a really great little game, is that a variable number of cards are revealed in the row of 8 cards. So sometimes you might get all 8 cards revealed, so you know what auctions are coming up in that round, and you can act accordingly. But you might only have 4, or you might technically only have 1 card. So you're bidding blind in terms of, you can be bidding blind in terms of what's coming up in the later part of the auction. However, if you look at the cards that are revealed and you think, I really, really, really don't want to win that particular card that's coming up, you can bid all of your hand. And if you win that bid, then you don't have to bid anymore, and you can avoid the bad stuff. Now, the other important thing about Fzzzt in terms of not wanting to win, because some of these, this is the interesting thing about Fzzzt, some of the cards you just don't want to bid, not just don't want to win, not just the Fzzzt, but some of the production units are difficult to make things on. This one requires you to allocate 4 different icons to get 13 points. Now, the trouble is, if you don't manage to allocate anything to a production unit, you score minus that amount of point. So sometimes you might have some production units come up late in the game. You really don't want to win them. So that concentrates the mind quite a lot. And the values,
the stuff going on in the auction.
Yep.
And a quick hello to Robert and Yoda. Lovely to see you.
Hi.
So the currency that you're bidding, the cards, do they go back into your deck to potentially come out? Yes. And so that's a very interesting twist on a typical thing, because you're losing the currency for that succession of auctions, but you're not losing that currency from the game, which is typically what you would assume when you do an auction. So that does make it very different.
Yes. When you win a card, you put it into your discard pile, and then that means you'll get it later in the game.
And it's got this typical deck building style thing, which the cards you win also go into your discard pile, and then you shuffle them up when you're out of cards, and then you draw back up to 6 potentially.
It has a little wrinkle to mean you can thin your deck. If you've got production units, you can allocate robots to your production units, which gets them out of your deck and just face down the table. That means if you've got low value ones, you want to allocate them to your production units, so you've only got high value ones left in your hand.
So in a sense,
that's quite a nice.
This feels like it's taken the sealed bid mechanism. So just for the record, I've still not played Fzzzt. Maybe we could play it one day when I come over. I think I heard about a potential retheming that Tony called like or something like the train noise.
Quite possibly.
But it does feel like you've taken sealed bids, or rather Tony had, and turned it into the focus of a game, taken this quite unobtrusive mechanism and made it incredibly obtrusive almost.
It's the center. It's absolutely the center of the whole game is the bidding, and I particularly like the fact that you've got some, very often you've got some information about what's coming up for the subsequent bids.
Really the constrained bidding that makes it, which we'll get to in a future show, which makes it the wrinkle that it is, that makes it able to be the central focus. And the constrained bidding, plus the fact that you've got this almost deck building aspect with working out what you might get in future stuff for your bids and calculating the value of your robots versus the currency. It seems like
it's got a lot in it. It's got a heck of a lot in it.
Shall we move on from Fzzzt?
Well, there is one other thing which is important for sealed bids, and that is the tie break. So all and you can see the spanner there. There we've got an actual spanner. The spanner is the tie break. So basically, one of the players will be the chief mechanic. If there's a tie for the winning, then if the chief mechanic is one of the tied players, they win. If they're not, then it goes clockwise round from the chief mechanic. And interestingly, so that the chief mechanic doesn't just stay there, the loser of any tie becomes the chief mechanic and gets the spanner. Now, the real spanner, we don't usually use the real spanner in English.
It's involved in the tie.
then it goes clockwise from the chief mechanic.
Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense.
We actually have a mechanic printed on the box. Sorry, a spanner printed on the box, so you can use that. But the Russian version had real spanner in the box, which I thought was quite a nice thing.
That's amazing.
But it's important with sealed bids having some kind of tie break, which we've mentioned already, is vital.
Now, I think talking about tie breaks in our next game, QE, I can't actually remember. I do apologize for not remembering the tie break, but I thought that QE was a really interesting example of sealed bids, where you can write literally any number you
Anything
want.
you like, yes.
My favorite bit of the game is when I get into scientific notation. So I do like 3 times 10 to the 33 or whatever. And then, yeah, it just goes. I mean, it's already ridiculous at that point. But I've won having spent like 10 to the 70 amount like of money.
But the point with QE though, is if you've got the highest, if you spent the most amount of money, you can't win.
But the
So
thing
you do
about
have to
QE
be a
is
bit
also
careful.
that if you keep outbidding everyone, at some point someone else says, I have to win something, so then they outbid you. And then at that point, if you keep
Yes.
ramping it up every single turn, then you're laughing. That's what I tried to do. I tried to be the agent of chaos.
Oh, right, yeah. I
And
can't imagine you as the agent of chaos, Ben. It's just not right. Yeah, but I like.
this game was relatively benign. They only stuck to 6 digits.
Oh,
It was
that's really
3.310690
that's a bit tame. That's a bit tame, yes.
But yeah, with QE, as you say, it's like High Society, which Gavin was not aware of, I hear, when they made the game. And highest bidder wins. I think that Gavin made it as an allegory for greed.
Yes.
And how everything is kind of a sham. And it does have a little bit of that. As the game goes on, you'll be bidding on things that give you maybe something to do with your country, which gives you extra points. It might give you some financial or like there's different categories, and that's a set collection bits that gives you extra points. And there's also some inherent points with the stuff you're bidding for.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interest in how much is this worth. It's unclear, and I think that lack of clarity is super important to sealed bids, because if it's too clear, then unless the cancellation is part of the wrinkle of the game, of course, unless like that tie-breaking mechanism is something that you want to happen often, then you want to have it be a little bit unclear. Would you agree with me on this? That
I think so. Yes. I think with QE is QE everybody pays. I can't remember actually.
No.
I just confess
only one person pays.
I haven't actually played QE. I'm ashamed to say. I played most of Gavin's game,
And
but
the most interesting thing about QE is the limited information. So it takes sealed bids and it adds this wrinkle where there's one person who puts their bid face up, everyone else sees it,
right,
and then everyone else puts their bids in secretly, and the person who had their bid face up looks at all the others, determines which one is the highest, and then gives it back to that person. But no one actually knows what the winning bid was.
right.
So you can't keep track of stuff very easily. So the flow of information, what you write to put up, might be your way of ramping up the bid. Conversely, what people bid secretly, that might be when you are, I'm not going to say the auctioneer, but the person running that, you do get this extra bit of information, which is really delicious. So it's not just about the money flowing. Well, not that it flows around, because you just print whatever you want.
There's no money. So they're all central banks.
It's literally all based
it's all
on
invented money. In fact, it has no real currency. Yes, it reminds me quite a lot because it's got that really heavily impactful psychological aspect. It reminds me of a game called Intrigue. Do you remember? Do you remember Intrigue? Where
I've not played that one.
Intrigue is literally about you're trying to get your particular people to get jobs with the the companies, the houses that other players run, and it's a game about bribery. But the point here is you can bribe your opponents, but they can accept whichever person they want, regardless of the amount of the bribe. So it's not a bidding game at all. It's a bribery game, and so it's all about the politics and how trustworthy you think people are. So it's about reading the other players. That concept of Yomi that is mentioned in the book here. The idea that it's all about reading your
Yomi
opponents.
is like when you try to guess what your opponent's going to do.
Yeah. And QE reminds me very, very much of that. Because you want to know, is my opponent going to bid 10 to the 70? Or is my opponent just going to duck at this point? And that's a really interesting type of game. I mean, I think it's one of those games where it has to be relatively short. Otherwise, I mean, I can't imagine. I don't know how long does QE last? Not
like I would say, like it's in the 40-minute mark. Let's say.
Yeah. But you wouldn't want a 3-hour game with this because the tension would be.
I mean, when you say relatively short, this is all relative. I mean, me, like I've designed games that are literally 2 minutes to play, maybe 5 minutes, including teaching.
Yes, that's true.
Which is a bit unusual, where the demo of the game is more than double the length. But I would like to go to For Sale at this point, which is what we talked about, where there are no ties. So there's 2 halves to this game. The first half, it is turn order until pass. And then when you pass, you take the worst house, and the houses can be seen around the outside. Then the second half of the game is a series of sealed bid auctions. A number of money cards are put into the center equal to the players. So here you've got 0, 3, 8, and 10. And then everyone bids with one of the houses that they've got. So here, this person with 6 gets the 0, and is probably, unless that was their lowest cards, they might be a bit disappointed. 11 gets the 3, and they're probably going to feel a little bit disappointed that they overbid. 17 gets the 8, which feels like a good jump. They're probably reasonably happy. And 28, which is almost the best number, 30 is the best number, gets a 10. And I think, sure, they got the 10, but they might be thinking, well, I could have bid 18 or anything. So they might be a bit unhappy. And I think sealed bid itself does add this Yomi like that. I mean, it's similar to once around auctions, but even more so in that you really need to gauge what other people are going to bid for this. And sealed bid with multiple lots is really fascinating. I love it here.
Yes, I would agree. It's a very nice thing. I'm sure I have played For Sale, but a long time ago, and only once or twice probably. But it's a great game, I have to say. I'm really glad we went into QE a bit there, because that is, I was almost going to say an overlooked gem, but it's not overlooked, is it really? Because a lot of people like QE, and it's a thoroughly great game.
I enjoyed QE that I learned last year at ManorCon. It was enjoyably chaotic. I would say it's very player dependent. It's very interactive.
All these psychological based games, really, like Intrigue, they are quite chaotic, and I think that's quite fun.
I think one really interesting thing about For Sale that I want to say, because they've designed out the potential for ties by having unique bids, that allows you to have multiple lots in a sealed bid auction, which, thinking about it, I'm not sure I've seen in any other game. It's the boom, everyone puts something down, flip over, and now straight away everyone gets something. And there is this delightful thing of, imagine if it was 0088, which is entirely possible. Well, in this case, you probably either want to be last or maybe second.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, I think I was almost going to say you kind of almost need multiple lots because it gives you a bit more information. In a way, with Fzzzt verges on that, because you do have some information. It's not multiple lot, but you do have information about but you do have information about the subsequent auctions, and everybody will over the 8 auctions in each round, everybody will lose cards as they win auctions. So it's a bit towards the end of the game, you very often are trying to bid for a specific production unit that you really want, and if you bid low each time, drain people's cards out of their hands, then you can grab that one that you actually want late, and that feels. But you may be bidding all your cards for it. So
I
if you've
think
got
you're right, and that having a little bit more information in Fzzzt sounds like it's adding a little bit of more complexity to the decision of what to bid. And I think it's similar to, for example, in a Game of Thrones, where what you're bidding for is this intangible thing of influence. What does that even mean? What is this thing worth? And there's this, like, if you were just bidding for straight up points, then that's not great.
Also, with like a lot of these, it is slightly more complex, I would agree. It may be something, there may be a card which is valuable to you, but not necessarily valuable to somebody else. So you might think that some players might be hate bidding against you, or are they? So there's quite a lot of trying to think how your opponents. For example, if I've got the one which requires me to get 4 different robots, and somebody's been tracking what I've been buying, and they know I'm missing one type, they may hate bid against me in the one that I really need, so I have to bid more. So there's a lot of that kind of extra complexity, but fun, interesting decisions in Fzzzt.
I would like to talk about two games that I've done something on. One was not designed by me. This was designed by Alex Cannon with help from Fzzzt, and I did do a bit of development on it. And this was the winner of the 2020 LDEC Design Contest.
Right.
And it's a really interesting system. It's not a word game. The letters are there to show the value of the card, and the suits are there to have a set collection mechanism. Now, the interesting thing is you put down your card. So let's say you've put down your A. That's going to beat someone else who's put down an E, if you know what I mean. And because all the letter pairings are slightly different, you just say, well, which of these cards is earlier in the alphabet?
Right.
That one allows you to go first. And whoever's earliest in the alphabet gets to take one of the cards from the center.
Right.
As you see right now, there's 4 cards in the center.
Yeah.
Now, the key thing is that sometimes you really don't care, in which case you'll put down your worst card. But then there's the additional wrinkle that the bids from the previous turn are going to be the lots for the next turn.
Oh, that's great. I like that.
So even though it's a different dimension, so when you're bidding, you only care about the letters, but when it's being used to bid and it goes into the center of the table, you only care about the borders, and then you bring it in front of you. Well, there's also a majority scoring for each number.
So you can be seeding. You're seeding cards for the next round bid potentially.
Exactly. So you might be thinking, well, I really want more of the swirls because I've got swirls. I want to keep up this big collection of swirls that I have. I don't want to go one turn without getting my swirls. So I'm going to put down a swirl, even though it's not my worst card.
So is that set collection for scoring?
The collection is entirely about set collection. So there's, in the end, we changed it one last time where it was personal set collection, pretty much triangular for how many of each border you have, and a majority for each number. So the person with the most 1s gets 1, person with the most 2s gets 2, and so forth.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I like that seeding for the next auction. That's so if you use a high value card, it's gone from your hand, but if it's gone from your hand, which means you can't use it in the next auction. So you do have to be very careful about what you're collecting, and you have to keep an eye on what everybody else is doing. So it's got, that's great. I like that. Such a simple idea. Yep.
Yeah, it was a great idea, and I feel like we really brought it to the fore. And I'm hoping that, I can share it with more people. I would finally like to give an example that I don't yet have a photo of on Board Game Geek at least, but it's a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer. And this is, I'm going to say the mechanics are 90. I mean, it's in a state that I would be happy to print it as is, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
And I'm probably going to spend a couple of hours, possibly on the train, having a quick one last look over at the cards, writing the rules, and then I'll draw some graphics, and that will be it. It's probably not going to be play tested again until it's released at UK Games Expo. So this came about because of our discussion of English
Mm.
auctions, in fact, where
Yes.
we talked about how there's not that many games about English auctions, and for it to be a true English auction game, you want to reward the auctioneer the higher it goes. So the question was, well, how do you determine who is the auctioneer? And it could have these. My two choices were either you bid for it or you take it in turns. And I was like, let's bid for it.
Mm.
Obviously, this auction to become the auctioneer is not the key auction in the game. The key auction is the English auction.
Yes.
But then, so the first auction is a sealed bid with the winning bid going out of the game, and the tiebreak is simply the person closest to
Right.
the
Mm.
previous auctioneer. So starting on their left, so the
Yeah.
auctioneer would lose if they are tied with anyone, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Just to avoid the auctioneer keep constantly being the same person, which if you'll say, yeah, give someone else a go. And if I bid, so a lot is flipped over, and a lot involves some amount of currency. It might be 5 currency and some number of cubes. So it might be 2 cubes, for example. I don't know.
Yeah. Mm.
And cubes are randomly selected. At the end of the game, you get a set collection thing
Right. Yeah.
for the points are 1, 2, 4, 7, 10 for having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cubes of the same color. And so if in the middle you've got 5 money and 2 cubes, you'd be thinking, well, people should be bidding at least 7 for this. I think that 11 is a reasonable bid for this. So to become the auctioneer, I definitely want to bid less than 11, and I want to. 6 seems reasonable, but let's go conservative. Let's go with 5. I don't know. I'll bid 5. And then I bid 5. Now, that my 5 goes out of the game. I'm the auctioneer. And if the lot goes for more than 5, I've made a profit. If it goes
Right.
less than 5, then I'm sad and I'll accuse everyone else of having undervalued the lot. And if it goes for exactly 5, I'll be a little bit
Yeah.
grumpy, but
Yeah.
less sad. And so it's got this delicious thing of you seal bid how much you think other people are going to bid on the English auction, if that makes
I like
sense.
it. Yes. Mm. It's quite a nice dynamic. That I think this shows that sealed bid auctions are really flexible. I mean, as I said with
Mhm.
Fzzzt, it's not completely sealed. It's kind of a little bit of information, and information about all the upcoming auctions. With for sale, you've got multiple lots, and with your game, you're doing you're doing a bid in order to become an auctioneer for an English auction. I think there's so much variety. I was going to try to look at sealed bid auctions and say what don't we like it, but how can we critique sealed bids?
Well,
But I
let's
mean, obviously
um,
we can do later, but they're very versatile.
I absolutely agree. Let's run through our general questions. How
Yeah,
does it impact the game? How it's affect the experience at the
yeah,
table? I think it's a low impact mechanism. I think that it doesn't have to be the main focus. Actually, even in Seize the Power, it used to be a much more complex auction until when it was signed by Inside the Box, and I'm sad that obviously they've gone down under. But yeah, going down under sounds like they've gone to Australia. They've gone bankrupt into
yeah.
liquidation.
Let's not go
Um,
there.
but yeah, Rose and Luke said, well, it seems like it's adding too much time. And when we moved from once around and losers pay half their money, which I really liked as a mech.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
not once around, turn order until pass, but
yes,
losers pay half their money. And that
yeah,
was really interesting. But moving to a sealed bid auction, that literally cut the game, I would say,
uh-huh.
from a typically in half, from roughly
Right,
100 minutes to 50 minutes
right. So I
when
mean
you were
that's
playing.
yeah, that's the point about sealed bid auctions. It speeds up the auction process. I mean, once around should still be reasonably quick in most cases, but I think sealed bids does
There's
concentrate
nothing
on that a lot.
faster. If you've got
No,
something that
it's
you're
definitely fast.
unsure
Yeah,
of the value of and you want people to make a guess or estimates of that value, and that's something interesting in the game, like it's not a case of, hey, we're going to spend 5 minutes discussing how much we want this thing in. I mean,
yeah,
going back to Rising Sun and Ankh and Game of Thrones, these are not meant to be auction games. It's just a quick case of how much is this potential action, this potential affordance worth. You're not even bidding for physical stuff necessarily.
yeah,
You're
exactly.
bidding for the potential to do something. And then it's like, boom, that's it.
Yes, that's done. I think that's. I mean, I think it's quite a nice mechanism for it, as long as you've got a really easy currency to use for just deciding the start player for the round. That would be really quite nice. I think. Going back to Fzzzt briefly, we did try various mechanisms when we were developing the game. I think we did try once around, so you know what the previous bids were. And the problem we had with that was twofold. Really, it meant that the people who were bidding at first had no knowledge, had no information about other people valued things, and that meant it was really easy for people later on to make whatever bid they liked. So it became perversely difficult for the people starting the auction and really too easy for people ending the auction. So we changed to the version, the sealed bid stuff. But we wanted to give people a bit of information so that they could. They weren't valuing things completely in the dark, hence the number of cards. And the key there was having a zero. Forcing people to bid was quite key. You have to bid at least one card. And so if you know somebody's used their zero, that's really helpful information because you know they
But
can't bid zero.
it's interesting that you talk about having a bunch of cards up, because it's possible in Fizz, I understand, to have just one card visible, but that's relatively unusual. Is that correct?
It's relatively unusual. Yes.
And
Usually you
so
have.
typically when you're playing a game for the first time, you see something and you're like, okay, well, is this a good card? Is it a bad card? I have no way of knowing, but unless you take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, at least a couple of minutes before the start of the game to look through the deck. But here, even if you've not done that, you might start off with four things laid down and you
Yeah,
can
you can
appreciate,
easily.
okay,
Yes.
that's worth more, that's worth less. And then because things come, that allows you to have sealed bid with the money not even going out of your hand, which is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, you do. It's relative. Even if you've only got one card visible, you can generally assess because each card has a face value. Each card has a face value for both its bidding potential and its scoring potential, which you can see straight away. So if it's a five zap card, that's very high bidding value, and I can't remember what the points are. That's if that comes face up as a one and only card, that's quite a valuable card in its own right. And a one is a not very valuable card in its own right. So you can see that straight away. The great thing about Fzzzt is, if for new players, is it develops over time. So that later on, once you've got production units in play, the value of the cards will change depending on which player you are, depending on which production units you've got. So that fleshes out and deepens that kind of auction mechanism quite nicely.
In terms of versatility, would you agree that this is the most versatile of all the auctions, just because it's so easy to fit in?
I think so. It's as versatile. It's possibly more versatile once around, isn't it? Probably, and it's got that advantage of being quicker. So it's very versatile. As we were saying, you could use it for a quick highest unique bid wins for doing a start player, or you can have it as the basis of a whole game, like with Fizz. So yeah, very versatile. And it fits with games that that require people to have a good appreciation of the value that each other player will put on games. Like most auctions, it's all about how do I value this thing that's up for auction compared to how other players value it, and that is really nice. So it will appeal to people who like that kind of subjective valuation of stuff. So it's generally, I would say, it's not necessarily a simple auction, is it, for players? It can be simple mechanics to implement.
I mean, it is difficult to gauge, and certainly with sealed bid, when I've in a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer, if I bid double what everyone else has bid, I do feel a bit hard done by, but there's that delicious bite.
Yes. If you look at real life sealed bid auctions, like bidding for houses or bidding for rail franchises or whatever, those can go potentially horribly wrong. Usually it's the lowest bid that it'll be. For a contract, it's usually the lowest bid that wins. For a house, it'll be the highest bid. But the trouble is, you don't want to be in a situation where you bid $500,000 for a house and the next highest bid is 250,000 because you've really massively overbid. And of course, with those kind of real life sealed bids, you don't usually have any information about what other people are going to bid at all, unless you look at the track record of those people who have been involved in similar situations.
The eBay way, which is kind of, okay, eBay, because there's a real-time element, someone can keep coming in, so it is halfway between an English auction and sealed bid, because if someone tries to snipe you at the last minute, they don't know what you've actually put. You're only bidding the next step above what the next highest bidder has, which could be another wrinkle that you could use in a game.
I think sniping is a bit of a broken mechanic, isn't it, really?
Let's talk about, okay, we've both used it in games. Will we continue to use it? I think that for me, whilst turn order until pass is the default, I think that I have been convinced by the ways of sealed bid. I think that for me, sealed bid, I've started preferring it as a tighter, faster mechanism, and less downtime.
I would agree. The disadvantage is that you do have to have some kind of tie break, which feels
everything like Robert's what Roberts, I did read that. I'll get into that in just a couple of sections.
It feels a bit, the tie break, the need for tie break feels a little bit gamey. Even with Fzzzt, it felt a little bit gamey to have to sort out a tie break. And I think that's possibly the attraction of, if it's tied, they're eliminated. That's the attraction of that. It means there's no tie break. You just eliminate the highest bidders. That's the only criticism I would have with that.
So, who would enjoy it? I think that it still has that spice of, you need to evaluate this stuff correctly. So I think that people who enjoy auctions, whilst it does make it slightly recede, it does still give that joy of feeling, I valued this correctly and I did the correct thing. It does have a bit of yummy, like that, oh, what's everyone else going to bid? I want to bid just slightly more than them. And people who like interactive stuff, but maybe don't want to dilly-dally around.
Yeah.
You've got nothing else to add?
Not really, no.
Okay, let's talk about when it's bad. Other than the tie break, is there any other stuff?
I think it kind of has an inbuilt thinkiness which might not appeal to some gamers. It's probably not a family game type thing, really. Well, sorry, I should clarify. It might be a family game thing for a mature game market like Eurogames, like in Germany. It might not be in the UK. It's possibly a little bit too mechanic-y, gamery. Yeah,
there is definitely the potential for feel bad moments. I mean, like I mentioned in the illustration of For Sale, I mean, if you've just bid
Mm,
your best card, a 28, and then you realize, well, I also had a 20 and an
yeah, I could have
18
bid
in
that.
my hand.
Yes,
I could have
yes.
bid those. And then you're kind of slightly kicking yourself. It's got that,
It's not forgiving, if we can put it that way. It's not
yeah,
necessarily forgiving to a newcomer.
yeah, you need to be willing to evaluate. You need
Yeah.
to, it does give the potential to make a big mistake, almost catastrophically potentially. And then when we get into tie breaks, Robert says, are you familiar with Ozulimio? Sealed bids, then ties are broken by who is highest up a player's stack of flags.
Oh,
When someone
right.
wins a tie, their flag goes to the bottom of the stack.
That's a nice mechanism. I like that.
I've not seen
Mm.
that particular game. I have seen an identical tiebreaker mechanism in other games, and I feel like it goes into what Alan was saying of it being quite gamey. I mean, this is almost probably the fairest, best way to solve tie breaks, I would say.
I would say that
And
our one in Fzzzt with the chief mechanic and then going clockwise round if the chief mechanic's not involved. I mean, it even takes quite a long time to explain. I mean, it's very easy in the game. You can say you're the chief mechanic. If you were in the tie, you win it. If you weren't, then look round the table. But it's a bit fiddly. Whereas I think that mechanism, just having a stack of flags, if you win a tie, it goes to the bottom. That's visible. It's easy
you're
to
right,
it's easy
actually.
to
It might
adjust. I
be
like that.
slightly easier to it, if not easier, it's maybe not that much harder to explain
Mm.
than just turn order. And it's certainly a lot fairer because in Fist, if player one has the chief mechanic thing, and then players 3 and 4 are in a tie, then player 3 wins, player 4 gets
Yeah.
the spanner,
Yes.
and player 1 and 2 feel a little bit hard done by
Well,
because
but part of the first game is manipulating the tiebreak, and that's for experienced players. That's quite an important part of the auction process, is manipulating the tiebreak. Because if you break ties, if I recall correctly, you break the tie. You don't get a choice. If there's a tie break on the Fzzzt card, which I don't want, and I've got the chief mechanic, I get it, and the other players in the bidding know that. So it really, having the chief mechanic at the right time is quite important. So you can try to engineer to lose a tie break in order to get the chief mechanic, so that you've got the chief mechanic when the card comes up which you want to win. So all
interesting.
those kind of intricacies
It
are built
seems
into
like
that
that
mechanism.
gets into the player chaos
Mm.
and Yomi, which you
Yeah, yeah.
were concerned about with the sealed bids with cancellation, though.
Um, I I think the problem with the sealed bid with cancellation for me was simply that you need a heck of a lot of information and insight to do it deliberately. Whereas with Fzzzt,
Is it
it's
that? I mean,
simpler to engineer, I think.
maybe the other thing about sealed bids with cancellation, it's really in your face.
Yes,
Whereas
yes,
engineering something, that's almost like a hidden strategy.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like what Mark Goldwasser
It's an
calls
emerging
lenticular
strategy. Yeah, it's an emerging strategy
lenticular
which you can
design, where
manipulate.
it's something that a high level player can be aware
Yeah,
of, but a low level player doesn't need to pay attention to it, really.
yeah, exactly. But yes, the cancellation strategy definitely. I agree with the book on it. The cancellation one can be a bit of a lottery. It could be, oh well, I mean, I didn't expect that. I couldn't predict that was going to happen. It's particularly if you've got limited resources, or if you've got fixed bids. So if you've both got one card left, but there's no way of knowing what the cards are, and you both play those cards and you find that it's quotes randomly a tie and you both lose, that doesn't feel great. It's a small criticism.
Before we say goodbye and stop talking about this, I want to ask two things. Firstly, what do you think about the tiebreak I currently have in a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer, because there it's simply there's a bag of cubes, and that, well, I expect people to supply their own bag and their cubes. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
Betty
yeah,
bargain
yeah,
bag.
yeah.
But
Sure.
there's a bunch. The person who wins the blind auction to become, or sealed bid auction to become the auctioneer of the English auction, is the most disadvantaged when it comes time to winning the next English auction. And the value of these things is, I guess, similar, because the value of it is just in winning some money. So ultimately, whatever money you bid, you're always hoping that you get that plus a certain amount for other
Yeah.
people winning the auction. Um, but yeah, just makes it move round the table.
So
Does
what?
it
So
need
what
to
is?
be?
So what is the tie break?
It's just the person going left from the previous
Oh, right.
auctioneer.
Um, it's a fairly neutral implementation. It's not manipulatable, is it really? So I
No,
think
it's not. It's
you
not
don't,
meant
but
to
you
be
don't
part of
know
the game.
exactly.
It's not.
I think stick to something really simple is the best thing, so that
And then the
everybody
other
knows. Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask, because with sealed bids, you mentioned how in Fzzzt, technically
Mm.
in the rules,
Yeah. Yeah.
people are meant to put down a number of cards in turn order.
Yeah.
And it's true that in my game also, you can't quite expect people to necessarily cover up the cards. I mean, you could get them
Yes.
to put it down in their laps and then hold their
Yes.
cards like that, but that's a bit fiddly and awkward. So then the question becomes, if people are going to look at, oh, that person's bid two, maybe I'll bid another thing, even though that could be literally two money and my one card could be 10 money. Um, should that be part of the game? So I'm almost feeling like, um,
It,
yeah,
mm,
I'm reluctant to say officially do it turn order until pass or once around with number of cards and then reveal, because
is this a component issue? Is it? Do you? Is it because you're using cards for bidding? Do you need to use? Can you do a fist type bid with something other than cards? Because I don't. I mean, I don't know how. Is there information on the cards other than the value? Because if so, then
no,
maybe it's some other form of token you need rather than cards.
I mean, maybe, I mean, I'm not going to print it myself
Mm.
with tokens because cards are
Yeah.
cheap to print.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, you might be right that if it was, the nice thing
Yeah.
about cards is that when you get the auctions throughout the game, so you start off with your opening hand of cards, and that's something you can hold, and then you also get um, cards for the auctions, which have a number on them, which is the value you can use them for when it's in your
Yes.
hand, or and it says how many cubes they come with. So there is,
Oh,
for
right.
example, the
There is.
one with four
Yeah.
cubes and the one with five cubes, and the random cubes. You don't know their number necessarily.
Still could this could still be some form of token, but the other solution which people use is having a screen, which you may not want to do either. And then you can put cards behind your screen. That's extra components, and so there is components because the thing about sealed bids, which we haven't really addressed hugely, is that they do have to. Well, they would normally be you don't have any information about what your opponent's bidding. I mean,
Mm-mm.
unlike Fzzzt, where you know how many cards. So that is an issue,
Yeah,
and that's
because
the issue you address.
knowing a
Knowing,
number, even
yeah,
if you
it's
don't know the denominations, is an interesting wrinkle.
What
As you
knowing
said,
whether
it's
they
kind
bid
of
anything at all.
semi-sealed.
If you've got a hand, you don't know whether it's an empty hand or it's got some tokens in it. That's can be
Mm-mm.
quite key. So having a screen or having a coins in your
I
fist,
mean,
something
I
like that,
wonder,
may be
would
better.
it um, be a reasonable rule to just say everyone puts down cards, and if you look around and want to change the number of cards you've put down based on how many cards someone else put down, you're allowed to change that and stop when everyone's happy? That feels a bit awkward,
That's a bit vague though, isn't it? That's the trouble. It's a little bit vague.
but in
Um,
reality, there's always going to be a point where, I mean, I guess there's the potential for someone to say, well, if you put down 2 cards, I'm going to put
I'm going to
down
put down
1.
3, and then I'm going to
And
change and put down 4, and then I'm going to change back and put down 3. Yeah, it's too vague.
like that's kind of infinite loop. Is that infinite loop actually going to happen?
Well, to be fair,
Because
that's why with it's very similar to the decision that we made with Fzzzt. With Fzzzt, we knew it had to be a card game because of the other mechanisms in the game. So there, I think we did start by having we experimented with once around visible bids, and we also experimented with completely sealed bids. But we found that because it's putting cards down, I remember when we were playtesting, we thought, but the trouble is, you can see how many. You can't stop somebody seeing sometimes how many cards their opponents put down. Therefore, because it's cards and you're visibly making the bid, therefore make a virtue of it and say that is visible information. So at least you where it matters, you know that. And that's so I do know you've put down 1 card, or conversely, I know you've played 3 cards, which means I know you've not bid 0. And that's quite key. So I think it's a component issue. So if you're wedded to cards and no screen, then you have to make that decision. Really, you can't fudge that one. I think we tried, as I said, we did in the development process try to see if we could fudge it in Fzzzt, and you can't. As I said, later in the game, it doesn't matter so much because the variation in values is so much. But you still need to know whether it's 0 or not.
it's one of those things where it might
bluff.
only go wrong 1 in 1,000 times, but 1 in 1,000 times you still need to have a solution for that. So I think you're right. And in the included rules, it might just be a case of, okay, everyone puts down a sealed bid, but then with the little addendum saying if players need to or have any disputes, then you bid in order from the previous auctioneer.
Yeah. Something like that would work. That would work. It's nice for it to be really clear and definitive, I think, because although it feels like it might be adding some complexity, it's not, because it's not fudging, and I think that's quite good. I like the tiles though. I mean, if they've got information on them which is just a value and some cubes, the tiles it depends on how many you can bid. How many do you normally? Is there a limit on the number of things you can bid with?
Well, you start off with 5, and
but so you could have more.
I mean, it could be mini cards which are the same size as tiles potentially. Maybe it should all be mini cards. Maybe that is an answer.
Then you can put your hand down and cover the mini cards. That might work.
But
that might work. Yeah, that would work.
I think that after all this, I'm realizing that this idea of the semi-sealed bid is a really interesting one to explore, and there's so much possibility with playing around with the currency, manipulating the currency in your hand, in other people's hands. Maybe there could be a game where you are, as an attack, you take people's currency and then you change it up. So like you take like their 5 ones and then give them a 5 back, something like that. Because obviously 5 ones are nice because they give you flexibility.
There's a game, Louis XIV. I'm trying to remember whether that has. I'm not sure it has. I don't think it has.
It feels like there's so much more that could be done, and I would love to see more sealed bids. Let's wrap this up. And as we usually do, let's finish up with a question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Do you have a question of the day, Alan?
I do. What is your favourite prototype game that you've played recently?
Oh, is this excluding my own? Because for me,
yes, I think it should be excluding
after winning an auction to become the auctioneer.
Excluding our own. That's a bit too easy, isn't it? Really. And I would say I can answer that question. I played an interesting game at Aircon called Partisan, and it was by Todd and Kirsten at Earth. What are they called? Oh. Oh, now I've forgotten the name of the company. Anyway, Partisan. I will just quickly look that up because
While you're thinking about that, because I mean,
yes, it's a deck building two-player conflict game, but asymmetric, and it's really very interesting implementation because it's only got a very limited number of cards. It has something like I can't remember. It's about 20 cards a side, something like that. Earthformer Games. There we go. Earthformer Games. You're on your turn. You either attack or you recruit new cards from rows, a couple of rows of cards, which are visible to both players, so you know what your opponent's buying, which will give a specific ability. And so the interesting tactical and strategic part of the game is my opponent's bought that card. That suggests they might be going for this strategy, but then they know that I know that. And so I might be buying cards in reaction to that strategy. Then they might change direction. So it's got that really, really interesting knowledge of what your opponent's trying to do and trying to counter it and stick to your own plan at the same time.
I'll keep an eye out.
Really
for that.
nice.
So
It's going to be on Kickstarter soon, I think.
So I will give a shout out to 3 different things, and to everyone out there, have you played any prototypes recently, or have you got any favorite prototypes, any favorites unpublished games that you want to give a shout out to, something that's not your own? The first game I want to mention is the best unpublished game I've ever played, I believe, which is called Butterfly Wars by Matthew Puffett. It's the only game I've ever played which feels like a time travel game. Maybe I understand that there's anachrony, which is you kind of get a loan from the future and then you've got to pay it back, but it feels like it could be borrowing it from the mob, or it could be very easily redeemed. And I mean, I know you've got time stories, but
and there's Kronos, which kind of does a bit of time travel. It's not quite like that.
But Butterfly Wars is a game where it's a very simple war game. Little pieces on a map, you move them around. Very simple combat resolution. Honestly, if you played it through from start to finish without going back in time, it might be a bit too simplistic, but you go back in time. So each turn, you write down what you're doing. You've got simultaneous commands, but at some point you can say this car or this unit or has gone back in time to the start, and then it gets removed from this particular timeline. So you keep on going until at some point you start the game again. And then now some of your units, what they did has already been determined because it's already written down.
Okay, and the other units
that went back in time,
God,
now they've got independence.
But that sounds brain burny.
If you ever destroy a unit that was about to go back in time, then before it goes back in time, then there's a kind of paradox, and then that's the one way to actually remove a unit properly from the game. Because if you just kill it, then next round you might end up actually killing the unit that killed your unit before it kills your unit. In which case, your unit that was previously killed now has almost free will. If you see what I mean.
That sounds really brain burning. That sounds interesting. How many pieces are there? I better not be too many.
It starts off with, I believe, 4 pieces.
Oh yeah, okay.
But you might have by the end, you might have 4 versions of each piece potentially.
Yeah. That does sound what was that kind called? Butterfly
Wars. And during my time at Alley Cats Games, I highly recommended that Cesar pick it up. I think it does feel like a very niche game. I agreed with Cesar on that, but then so did Twilight Struggle, and that's done fairly well.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's one of these super niche games, but it's so different and so brilliant that people would see what it was.
Yeah, that sounds
Um,
great.
and other people talking about prototypes. Robert says I played a prototype of Smite by Chris Bockley at Terracon, which I enjoyed. I thought it had lots of potential. Greek gods controlling their followers, area control, deck building, and a bit of meanness. I like the sound of that. Um, Joe mentions a prototype of Winnie Kose
We'll see.
by
Yeah.
Alison Collins about playing archaeologists researching Machu Picchu. You collect evidence and build a picture of what you think the site was used for,
Uh,
and every time you research, you have an impact on the site, which you lose points for. A really interesting game being published next year.
that does sound
Exciting.
interesting. Yes.
The
To be fair, I didn't play. I didn't play a lot of games at Aircon, but I did see a lot of prototypes in the demo and playtest area. There was an interesting War of the Worlds game, which was solo or team cooperative on War of the Worlds, which looks fun. I didn't actually play it, so I can't really comment on the ones I didn't play. But
I do
there were
want
some really good
to
ones.
wrap.
So if there is a list, if you got the Aircon
I mean,
book, you can look at the
the point
companies.
is
They're
new
really good.
games are being made all the time, and
Yeah,
lots of them are brilliant. And
yeah.
I just want to give a very quick shout out to two people, Ellie Dix, who continues making amazing stuff, and one game in particular is a social deduction dexterity real time game, which is totally different to Hand Wombat, which is also a real time social deduction and dexterity game. I mean, you wait decades or hundreds of years for one and to
And
come
then
at
the
once.
two come on
But
at
I'm
once.
not going to give more
Excellent.
details because I know Ellie Dix is going to be pitching that. And but it's brilliant. And the other thing I want to say is Gorm, who made I can't. It's a wooden game where it's all about runes and positioning thing and area control. It's just a gorgeous thing. But I would like to move on to say over to you. What's up to you? You can share, Botsy, if you want to. Is there something that you want to do? Something you need to do? Please share. I promise that I care. I am personally going to be taking a long train back down to England. I'm going to London. And tonight I will have a chat with Kirsten Lunda about Questable and discuss all the games that we played over the weekend. I might potentially do a bit of solo testing of that. I might also write up a whole bunch of stuff for my deck construction game and the final pondering of the exact cards, possibly mini cards. I'll have to ponder that as well. But that's a separate pondering. I'll be pondering the numbers of the cubes and currency and the frequency of stuff for a game about auctioning cubes after winning an auction to become the auctioneer. And finally, and most importantly, between today and tomorrow, I do need to have a look at LARP, which I already wrote, but I just want to check through it because I'm running it again on for the third time this weekend. So I just want to make sure that if there's anything that I can improve, I will. And secondly, there's a LARP that I agreed to make that I haven't yet properly started. And so I've got to make that either in the next 2 days or pull out. And so we'll see how that goes. But yes.
That sounds like a lot. That sounds like a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I will be. We have now got our date for our house renovation and move. So, and it's we shall, fingers crossed, and everything else crossed, be moving out on roughly the 1st of April because the work starts on the 3rd. So that will be good. So basically, starting packing for some of the stuff that we need to take with us when we move over to Ramsey. Secondly, we just upgraded our iPhones, so I am going to be looking at my new iPhone and trying to optimize it a bit more because I've got lots of things which don't work properly. Well, no, they work properly, but not as I want to configure them. So I'm going to be doing that. And finally, I'm looking forward to receiving it this week. Kingmaker, the real game. It's a bit exciting. So
yes, I saw on Board Game Geek someone saying that they'd gotten their shipping notices.
Yeah, so that's very exciting. Somewhat trepidatious because you never know until it's been delivered how it's going to look, do you? But there we go. I shall let you know.
So I want to. Oh, wait. First, I need to do the recap and wrap up before we
Yeah.
finish up. So, to recap and wrap up, sealed bid auctions are brilliant. So is watering plants. I think that sealed bid
Yes.
auctions are fast and quick, and they still have that value judgments of how much is this actually worth. Um, that will please people who enjoy auctions. You do need to think about tiebreakers. There's a possibility of having all the numbers being totally unique. Like, I mean, Ra, even though it's not sealed bid, is an example of having totally unique currency, but for sale, which is a wonderful example of having unique numbers on cards for sealed bids. You can play with it in different ways, like the previous bids go into the center and are the lots for the next game. You can have QE, which you can bid literally any number you want, and have the sealed bids continue to be sealed and have it be about that information being slowly revealed. You can have something where you're bidding with cards and then you reveal the number of cards, so it's kind of partially sealed, but then at a certain point it doesn't really matter, I guess. But for whatever reason, there's only 94 games listed, and I believe that this is probably because it's been undertagged.
I think it has. Yeah.
As opposed to the other one that had like 12 listed and was over, like, I believe that English auctions are overtagged personally. I submitted some corrections, but they've taken a long time to sort that out. Anyway, do you have anything to add to the recap and wrap up?
Oh, I'm happy.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you,
if
Ben.
you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all of those places. And if check out my YouTube, or which you might be already aware of, stuffbybez.bigcartel.com. I will be adding new stuff to the shop within the next couple of days. I really should do that. Yeah, also within the next couple of days. And then yeah, I will be back tomorrow chatting about oh yeah, creative endeavors with Ed from Jolly Boat. That's
Oh,
going to
right.
be quite interesting.
That
So check
sounds
out
good.
stuffbybez.com/streams. And thank you very much, everyone, especially Alan Paul. And if you want to check
Thank
out
you.
Alan Paul, where do you like to be found?
Email alan@alanpaul.co.uk or alan@spicetogames.co.uk. I'm on Bentham Fish. I'm Bentham Fish on Twitter, and I have a blog on the Spice Games website. So any of those is fine by me.
Thank you. And please, to everyone, if you felt this was useful, please do share, spread the word, share the link. Obviously, the YouTube is up like literally right now because I multi-stream on Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, which I can only do because I never went, what do they call it, affiliates. Because, I mean, yeah, affiliates means that you suddenly get adverts that people can't avoid.
Yeah, we don't want that.
And thank you, Joseph. Joe, it's lovely to have you and Robert here. Thank you both for
Thank
being
you, Robert.
here.
Yep.
For all the discussion.
Can I shout out that Robert's got a good game on Penguins as well, which it's not an auction game, but it's a nice game with penguins.
Talking
And let's
about
face it,
prototypes you've
we
recently
do
enjoyed.
like penguins.
Well, the only thing left to say at this point is, as always, lots of love and bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone.
Bye.